I call this special meeting of the Board of Fire Commissioners of South King Fire to order. Public hearing of 2024 grant budget. All commissioners are present, except for Mr. Fuller, who has absence. Mr. Berger, what's the questions?
United States of America, and to the republic, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Commissioner Ray Johnson. Mr. Berger. Mr. Benito. All right, agenda item 4. Director Ganem would like to make some comments and give some responses to questions and comments that we see during the
Okay, thanks everybody for coming today. For those who participated or watched the district finance presentation that we did October 3rd, there were a few comments during that session that we thought it was appropriate to follow up on. During that presentation, we shared what our operations firefighter staffing levels were. And so what I had done is overlaid call volume over a 10-year period with operations staffing, and that chart drew some confusion because of how it was viewed. So I broke it out for everyone to see. This is the same call volume that was presented during that presentation from 2013 to 2023. 16,400 calls in 2013, and the increases over the last 10 years to projected over 25,000 calls for this year. So I backed out the staffing levels and I put it into its own chart so that you could see the growth curve of the call volume during that period. Inches up, a little bit 2014 on up, but steady climb at that point. But then it does start to begin to shoot up 20 into 21. So now let's take a look at what our firefighter frontline staffing levels were during that period. So we had budgeted 117 firefighters in operations in 2013. We slowly were sort of steady and then began to climb up. And then in 2023, we had 138 budgeted. And as you'll see later in today's presentation, we actually are budgeting beyond that for 2020. So you can see that the growth curve of staffing levels is pretty significant in the last several years. Those two were overlaid before, and it drew confusion as to what I was trying to represent. So that's the staffing levels. Yes. Just a growth curve. Also during that presentation, Battalion Chief Barrett asked if we could also show what other staffing levels were in the organization. And I'm going to show you here in a minute sort of a summary of that. And I was talking with the fire chief, and we actually think it behooves us to do a staffing analysis as well. Because we've talked about how we've been under resourced throughout the entire district the last decade, and now we've made gains in the last several years to increase staffing. I went back and looked at budgeted positions during this period. And in 2013, we had 117 firefighters as represented on the previous slide. We had 4 chief officers and 4 battalion chiefs for a total of 8 chief officers. And then we had 22 support personnel. And that 22 support personnel includes members in finance, IT, an HR person, you go down the divisions. It's not for the purposes of today's meeting, which is why I'm not getting into each division. But it's simply a snapshot of 2013, how many FTEs we have as an organization. And then in 2019 and 2020, the reason why I chose those years, because those were the years where we saw the lid lift passage in 2018, so we increased firefighter staffing. I think that provided some financial comfort to the administration at the time, so we increased from 4 chief officers to 6 chief officers. And then we started to, between this period of 2013 to 2019, we started to grow our divisions again. But that also includes not only your support services, your finance, your IT, but we also had a CARES program. So you had 3 social workers, you had, other support functions of the organization, which contributed to the 34. Can't see it on the screen here, but that's a 38 going into 2020, and then a 42. So as you have tracked our budget processes over the years, you've seen that we've increased our staffing levels, not only in operations, but in our support rank and file. We had 5 chiefs between 2020 and 2023. And that drop right there is actually a result of Chief Church retiring and then us sort of maintaining status quo with the current company. And with the addition of Chief Deffenbaugh and Chief Winter, we're actually back up to 6, and the budget for each has that 6 in. So in the last 10 years, from a chief officer standpoint, we've recovered from the previous low of 4. We're at 6. We've got 4 battalion chiefs, and then our 44 support staff personnel. So in talking with the chief, this sort of intrigues us, and we think we want to do a deeper dive into what the staffing levels look like. And there's been a lot of fluctuations in those support positions. At one point in time, we had a finance director. We had a finance manager at one point. We had several social workers. So there's just been ebbs and flows in what that number represents over the years. But it would be very interesting to dive into that and take a look at where
The 2 aspects.
Yeah. Yeah, I should have taken it out, but the reason why I had actually documented here that between those years, we added a mechanic, we added a facilities individual, we added another HR person. I actually had a list describing what positions those were. In the 2023 budget, there's an asterisk there because of the 42 positions that were budgeted, two were not filled. That was an additional training officer that the district budgeted for because the consortium asked for an additional training officer, and it was a second community affairs officer. So of that 42, 2 went unfilled. So that's where it would be interesting to actually get into those support numbers and do a deep dive on. Did we actually, it was a budgeted number, but did we fill the position? Did somebody leave? What did we replace it with? Those types of things. And you can see some significant growth, not only in frontline firefighters, but overall from 147 10 years ago to a proposed 200 next year. So that will conclude some of the questions and that were asked during the budget presentation.
Okay. Next item is fund balance and reserves policy. We've sort of talked on and on for a long time about what our reserves like, what balances we have in the various funds, and what are various reserve funds for, all that stuff. So we finally get sort of put it in writing and put there Kelsey putting this policy together. So you've all received a copy of the proposed policy. So,
So Commissioner Gates is correct. Also presented during the finance presentation last month, we talked about the evolution of the fund balance / reserve policy position the district has had. Since about 2008, it started with some very generic language in the budget that the Board of Commissioners will maintain a certain amount of money. It was very vague. And then it was an $8 million amount, and it kind of grew gradually. But our fund balances over this period of time that we talked about have stayed stagnant. So Commissioner Gates is absolutely correct. Kelsey has been the driver behind the effort to take sort of generic language in our budget and actually solidify it into a board adopted policy to give us, the district, direction on what our reserves should look like. And so the policy was developed. We shared it at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, and got input there. And today, you all have copies of this policy. Today, we'd like to have a conversation, hopefully adoption of the policy.
The motion and a second to approve the policy.
Mr. Chairman, I move we adopt the policy, the unbalanced reserve policy.
There's a motion and a second to approve the policy. Comments, questions, discussion?
Mr. Chairman, pass.
Absolutely. So we have several accounts shared through the budget process. We have the general account, contingency fund, capital reserve fund, medical reserve fund, left one reserve fund. And this policy establishes the definitions for the funds, the purposes for the funds, and also what balances, reserve balances, the board will set for us to put into place. So instead of a set amount of money that ends up becoming stagnant over the years, we will adopt a policy that has a percentage threshold in it. So it's a percent of our annual operating expense budget, so that hopefully over time we are maintaining a fund balance level that is in line with what our revenues and our expenses are as we grow. Because as we've talked about, and we showed at the last two retreats, our lowest fund balance was $1.9 million in 2018, although our monthly expenditures had more than doubled. And so we need to ensure that in this budget, it will be nearly a $4 million a month expenditure, that we have enough funds in the bank to actually make ends meet. And then, as you talked about, Commissioner, the example of the earthquake and the disasters and our need to have funds available to support the community. So we established what the funds are, what the minimum balances will be, what the acceptable uses of the funds will be, and how those funds will be replenished. So if we need to go before the board and get authorization to dip into a contingency fund or a capital reserve fund or a rainy day fund, then there's some expectation on the part of the governance board and on the part of the district that it will be in fact replenished in some timely fashion. Am I missing something? Chief Crossan?
No, we're dealing with a fire code violation.
So I see on, sure which page it is, that it says 200.3.1 reserve balances. Second paragraph, single sentence says, the combined reserve balance shall be approximately 18 to 30% budgeted expenses. So, Joe, that would be a little less than 1/3 of the annual operating and capital expense, or is that just operating?
Operating.
And Kelsey, in your research with, for example, the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, maybe ICMA, others, what did you find was the recommended percentage or number of months that should be an emergency reserve or a major disaster emergency? That's for.
So the 18 to 30 is what is consistent with best practice for GFOA. The auditor's office also has best practice for our general fund balance, which is a minimum of 60 days and a best practice of 90 days. So we have a little bit of a combination.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
There's no other questions. There's a motion and a second to approve the policy. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Good work, Kelsey. Okay. Item number 6, 2024 draft budget presentation and public hearing. The budget we're going to look at today is our draft budget. There will be no action taken on the budget today. And depending on what comments we get, et cetera, it will be approved at the regular November meeting, November 28th. So I'll ask the chief and then his staff to present the budget. Commissioners are welcome to ask questions. At the end of the entire budget presentation, if there are any public comments, questions, we'll take those at that time. So, all right.
Thank you, sir. I just want to start off in saying I'm really excited about the 2024 budget. It does a lot for us. It addresses a lot of the things coming out of the strategic bridge plan, the priorities from the bridge plan. It does give us the opportunity to add 8 new staff to the line, which is always encouraging news. I do have to say thank you to Joe and Kelsey and the admin staff that have worked so hard on the budget. As you can see by the policy, they do a lot of work behind the scenes to keep us on the straight and narrow and make sure that we are living up to our responsibilities when it comes to our budget and our spending habits. I'm happy to say that this budget continues to build on continuity of last year's budget. It also continues to build our capacity to adjust and change as revenues adjust and change. It provides the flexibility for us to adapt with the environment. Director Ganem and I sat down, we talked about priorities. Everything that's in the budget, I have agreed with. Some things that have been removed from the budget or some of the changes were at my direction to Joe. And I fully endorse the 2024 budget you're about to have presented to you. So, Director Ganem.
Thanks, Chief. Before we get started, a couple of changes for this budget. As you can see from the homepage, it looks, or the front page, cover page, it looks a little bit different than previous budgets. We're now 3 iterations into this process, and so we're a lot more comfortable about what we can and can't do and start making some changes. We've added a table of contents. The online presentation might be okay, but for the individuals in the room, we're on a split screen here, so I don't know how it will look being split across 4 screens, but bear with me. So there might be some occasional adjusting and scrolling, which will be new for us. The other thing that we're going to do a little bit differently is historically, we have gone through this budget line by line, which makes for a very long 2 to 3 hour process. We are not going to do that today. The benefit of having Chief Van Valkenburg coming from an outside agency, a city where they're more concise and it's more of a summary presentation, I wholeheartedly accept his request to shorten this so that we're not sitting here listening to me talk more than I need to talk. So I'm not going to read the executive summary. I will just present highlights for not only the executive summary, but everything that falls below. So let's get started. Here's our new table of contents that we've added to the budget this year. So highlights for, please don't bother reading this. Highlights for this budget process, as the chief indicated, everything in this budget is in line with the strategic bridge plan. So the funding pillar, the desire to find a sustainable funding mechanism past next year, the need to increase our firefighter staffing levels. There's a theme in this budget cycle, as opposed to previous years where we were trying to play catch up with capital equipment. So there's significant investments in capital. This budget is more people and people that are specific to accomplishing the goals of the strategic bridge plan. So that is a reoccurring theme in this budget. Also a highlight from this year, as everybody knows, we went out for a lid lift 1 year earlier than we had originally planned on. Through the strategic bridge plan discussions, nowhere in those discussions was the idea to run a lid lift 1 year early. But as we got deeper into the negotiations, the labor negotiations process, and we looked at the financial cliff that can expect to occur after next year, it became more apparent to us that we should probably request and ask the public to support a lid lift 1 year early to provide some financial cushion for us going into next year. And the public supported that, as you will see in this budget, and we'll show you what we're able to do with that. But we still have the financial cliff. It's just not as deep, but we have a financial cliff after next year. Also of significance this year, Chief Matafton retired. Before his retirement, he initiated a name change to simply South Keene Fire. And so we are currently, as you all are well aware, trying to make those changes across the organization to drop the ampersand and rescue from our name. That is not a rebranding effort, so there is no money in the budget to do a rebranding. It was simply a small adjustment to our name. And then the board, of course, appointed Chief Van Valkenburg as our interim fire chief in September as they conduct a process. So those are kind of the highlights for those following the district and the items that we've been working on this year. Obviously, the emphasis of staffing. As we talked about in the district finance presentation, and as we just shared a few minutes ago, we have made a concerted effort to increase our firefighter staffing levels since 2020. And this budget, as you'll see in a minute, gets us, if approved, up to 146 frontline firefighters. So that is something that we're all very proud of, and that is something that we would not have been able to do if the lid lift was not in place. Also, you'll see in this budget, through the hiring of Chief Deffenbaugh and the appointment of Chief Winter, there will be a focus on starting a new MIH program to replace the CARES program that was terminated a few years ago. So there is some money in the budget to handle that. And then, of course, we've made efforts over the last few years to also invest in our capital replacement program, and we are fortunate that the budget supports another infusion of capital for replacements next year. Okay, property tax revenue. With the approval of the lid lift in August, next year we will collect the statutory maximum of $1.50 per thousand. With that amount, property taxes on existing parcels are estimated at $40,674,119 next year, and new construction at $334,792 for a combined property tax revenue of $41,008,911, something like that. That's enough. Let's just say $41 million next year. So this is an increase over the 2023's levied amount of $35,421,798. Tax levies, re-levy taxes for next year are coming in at $145,385. So due to the erosion of the $1.50 to $1.25 this year, if we had not run the lid lift, tax revenue for the fire district next year would have come in at about $1.9 million, just shy of $2 million. So that's what we would have had to have worked with next year. 8 firefighters next year cost the district $1.2 million. Total salary and benefits for a incoming firefighter is $150,000. So hiring 8 firefighters cost us 1.2. So if we had been limited to $1.9 million, there's not much left there to increase salaries, adjustments, inflations all across the board. So you can see the importance of collecting the statutory limit and what it can do for us. Also in 2024, as we've discussed many, many times, it is the final year of our maintenance and operations levy. So after next year, if we don't have something in place, we will have a $3.75 million budget hole. One thing that I've noted the last few years, these numbers will typically change prior to budget adoption and sometimes even change after budget adoption because the county will send us a final assessment after the budget has been adopted. In fact, this was sent to the commissioners last week for draft review, and I got a new updated amount yesterday. So this will change one more time before budget adoption, but it should be very close to what is being presented today. So when we capture total projected revenues, including property tax, the maintenance and operations levy, and miscellaneous revenues and reimbursements, we will hit $50,496,957 next year. We're officially will be a $50 million organization.
So just a quick question. When does the budget have to be in the county?
The 30th of November. So the Board of Commissioners will adopt it on November 28th at the regular meeting. And then upon adoption and signing the resolutions, we will send everything to the county the next day, if not that night.
Hey, Joe,
Very tight this year.
good question. What's the impact of the nonprofits who are exempt from paying taxes? What's the impact to us?
Well, I don't know that I have an answer to that, but in the executive summary, it's highlighted as one of the areas that we will be focusing on in the strategic planning process. Also, the TIF. So we have nonprofits, we have the tax increment area that the Federal Way, City of Federal Way is likely to move forward on. So we have multiple outside factors that will contribute to what our tax revenue looks like moving forward. Do you have anything, Chief, you want to add to that?
No, I think we captured it all.
Okay. Okay. Budget highlights for next year. Total operating expenses for 2024 are budgeted at $46,399,195, which is an increase over the 2023 budget by 12.61%. or $5,195,010. Highlights for the 2024 budget include 8 new firefighters to increase staffing. The hiring of an additional 8 to fill vacancies. So we have current vacancies and expected vacancies next year. So between those two, the chief and Human Resources and his team are going to be very busy hiring 16 firefighters. We have funding for a financial analyst position to assist with our funding efforts next year. And this one, the funding for a communications position. So this has been in the budget and has been recycled several times. It was our desire to add an additional community affairs officer. That won't happen, but we still have a need to have a communications position help us with our outreach efforts and content development. So this is to hire a civilian position into the organization to help us. We have the appointment of a deputy chief of EMS, Chief Deffenbaugh, and we have the appointment of district chief, Chief Winter. So that's also represented in the budget. And then we have wage adjustments based on the outcome of negotiations and wage adjustments for non-contract personnel also in this budget. And we are going to expect an increase in L&I rates next year. So all in all, there are a lot of contributing factors that contribute to a 12.61%.
Joe, you didn't highlight it with a bullet, but I noticed as I scanned through the line items, some pretty significant, in many cases, double-digit increases in materials, supplies, services, contracts. Is that a reflection of the fact we've been in this 40-year high inflationary period as well?
Absolutely.
And that's also reflected in the 12.6% increase?
That is reflected in the 12.61. And when I won't go line by line, but I will call out some specific increases that are contributing to this.
Because it's unusual and significant, perhaps significant, part of that, I would suggest adding a bullet to that effect so that whoever looks at this document later on would realize that that's inflation, unusually high inflation
That's a good point.
is also a part of the reason that's a digit increase.
That's a good point.
Oh, I just wanted to point out real quick, they are budgetary impacts, but I want to make sure everybody's on the same page when it comes to the deputy chief of EMS and Chief Winter. The reason that those are adds is those are new positions in the 2024 budget. We went to the commissioners and asked for permission to hire a couple months early, which you guys graciously granted to us. But that's a significant budgetary impact that is included in that 12%. But I just want everybody to understand why are they here, but they're new. They're new because we were allowed to hire a couple months early.
That's correct. Okay,
Although isn't it true that it's only a net increase of one chief
yeah,
officer, because you showed just going back to 6 from 5. So even though we've added 2 chief officer positions, one of them is fulfilling a.
there is a replacement, which is why it said not the hiring of, but an appointment. Because to his point, we did get permission to fill and hire those positions early. So I didn't want the budget to reflect it saying a new additional. It's what we currently have. All righty. So this is a snapshot of our expenses in 2023 compared to expenses today. And you'll see it overall 12 point, I must not have updated the other number. It's 12.48% increase overall. So one of the things that, and this is our draft presentation, but as these numbers change, in fact, Chief Crossan sent King County Fire Investigations quote last couple of days. Yeah. So when things change last minute, every capture has to be updated throughout the budget, So before budget adoption, this will be fine tuned, but there is a slight discrepancy between what was stated above and here. Okay, our capital budget for 2024. MIH program, Chief Devenbaugh doesn't quite know what the program will look like yet, but we do have money from King County EMS that we are sitting on. And so we've thrown in some money into the capital budget to outfit that program. If you recall the agreement that we had with Valley Regional before, they provided the vehicles. So we actually never really had our own vehicle. So there's some money for that purpose. Addition of motor pool vehicle, and then your typical striping and lighting, et cetera, packages. So total staff vehicles next year, $180,000. The heavy rescue, this is the first unit that we did a lease payment on. And so this will be our second lease payment. So this is now going to be an annual lease obligation on our part in the budget. Tools, operations tools and equipment coming in at $175,000. Information technology, $376,275. This includes a replacement of all of the mobile data computers and all of the Cradle points. And if you watched the presentation last month, these MDCs were replaced with the Big Bond. So this is another example of that technology now being outdated and us having to replace it again. So we're able to do that in our capital schedule now. Station improvements, $185,900. I'm sorry, there's a line there. Facilities division has indicated that we need to do structural engineer testing and sprinkler UL testing. And we also need to rekey the district. It's been some time since that's happened. And then what's most important to most of us are starting to remodel the bathrooms in the organization. As many know, the bathrooms are severely outdated and did not get updated with the safety improvement bond. That wasn't the purpose of the bond, but the bathrooms need a refresh. And so the fire chief has made it a priority to start replacing the toilets. All right. So also new in this budget process is the addition of a capital contingency fund. And so what we've, to Commissioner Berger's point, there have been cost increases in the last few years. And so what's happened is the teams will go out and they'll get a budget quote for a project in August or September. And then by the time they actually get to doing the project in the following year, the costs have gone up significantly and we've had no way really to capture that. And so working with finance, Kelsey's recommendation that we actually establish a contingency fund for capital so that we're not over budget because of those outside factors.
So that'll be an appropriated contingency amount.
Yes, it's a 10% over, it's captured 10% overall in here, but it should be about 10% of each project.
So the board won't have to
That's correct.
supplement to cover.
That's correct. Okay. Capital carryover for the reasons just described, supply chain issues. We have carried over capital the last few years. And Ken, although he's tried his hardest to buy vehicles, he hasn't bought enough vehicles. So he's got some money to carry over into next year. Some fire hose replacements are still outstanding. And then we've had some changes in the chief ranks the last few years. And I'd have to go back to the records and find out why, but there was a request last year to fund $17,000 in fitness upgrades. And I think that got lost in translation somehow because the team currently managing that believed that they somehow lost some money. And they did not in fact lose money because there's an allocation there of 17,000. Chief has recommended we carry that over and that the team be able to use that. So next year, capital carryover is $152,116. Okay. Fire levy rate. When we bring the fire, our statutory regular property tax levy back up to $1.50, and we add in the maintenance operations levy, which is anticipated to be at about 13 cents next year, and the safety improvement bond, the $39 million bond, which cost taxpayers about 10 cents per thousand. Our total levy rate for the fire district is projected to be $1.73 next year. If I get time, I will throw in a chart under assessed property values, but this time last year, assessed values in our jurisdiction was $28.4 billion. The numbers from the county this year are projected at 27.3, which is a little over $1 billion reduction in property values. And if you listen to the presentation last month, and I shared the projections from Keene County, they were anticipating about a 6% decrease in property values this year. And then things, maybe a 3% next year, and then things sort of evening out. Early on in our conversations, I shared that our citizens and some of our commissioners were receiving property tax statements with 7 to 9% reductions. The first numbers from the county actually mirrored that. So we were right in line. But as we've gotten updated projections from the county, that deficit has closed. And so this equates to a 3.61% reduction in AVs currently across our jurisdiction. So we went from a 7 to 9, which is really bad, to just under 4. So,
Joe?
yes.
To Commissioner Thompson's earlier comment about tax exempt residential properties. As I recall, the county actually does an assessed valuation of those properties. But what I don't know is, and maybe you do, and so this is my question, do they know what those are by jurisdiction? So for the city of Federal Way, city of Des Moines, what those might be.
They don't break it out by One second here, let me see if I can find. They don't break it out by jurisdiction. But there is a roll-up, that was recently added to the worksheet.
What I was gonna suggest is under this one line here, property taxes based upon a projected AV and so forth. Perhaps that number, an additional sentence identifying that number would be useful for our own information for the public.
I'll do that. In fact, this year, they changed the levy worksheet and they've added tax exemptions and they've added tax increment financing applications too to the spreadsheet. So I'll take a look at that new spreadsheet and see if I can't plug in those factors that you're recommending.
Because the 27 billion doesn't include however many millions are for those.
That's taken out.
properties.
That's correct, yeah. Snapshot view of our projected revenues.
Excuse me, one other point. You could then multiply the AV rate, the levy rate to see what the actual loss would be.
We can do that.
I think that would be useful information, don't you?
Oh, you bet, yeah, especially for future years, see how it's increasing
On the tip,
on both,
actually.
yeah.
Okay, projected revenues, property taxes, our maintenance and operations levy, money from King County EMS, our contract with Valley Regional. We have a plethora of miscellaneous revenue sources, but the one that I want to highlight here is new for next year is $602,316. King County Core MIH 2022 through 2023. So this number up above, this annual number that we receive from the county, the $2.8 million, includes core services and MIH money. But those are funds that are available to us upon spending and requesting reimbursement. And so because we did not have a CARES program the last couple of years, we have been banking those funds. And so the finance team has provided the chief and I what those numbers are exactly. It happens to be $602,316. And so ultimately the chief will decide, but it sounds like that will be money available to the MIH startup costs, because the MIH allocations every year from the county should help pay for the program. And so right now, the fact that we've banked this money, that's one-time money. And so the purchase of a couple of vehicles, equipment, software programs, whatever they need to get the program started, we've got some money from the county for them to work with. But then once the program is established, the reoccurring revenue from the county is what helps fund the program. So this is pointed out in this budget because that amount should not be there next year. And if it is, it should be a lot less. And second is because when we add that $602,000, that's actually what pushed us into the $50 million mark. Because our budget prior to that was 49 million.
I guess I should know this by now, but what's the line item that captures reimbursement from the state for deployments on wildland fires?
Well, we currently don't use a line item for that because what we get back from DNR is strictly wages and benefits. That's what we get back. And that money goes back into the general fund for staffing. So we don't have a defined line item. If we were to get reimbursement for a piece of apparatus, we would have to have a line item to account for that. Does that make sense?
No, because it's a revenue, so you have to record it to a revenue account. So what
We
revenue
do,
account?
yes, we do. In the state funded grants, it's the second to the bottom.
Which page are you on, Commissioner? By chance?
I think the same one you have.
Okay,
Yes. Second from the bottom, the state funded grants is where we put that in there. It's a $0 because we don't know how many
What-
equipment.
It's an offset.
Yes, I misunderstood your question a little
But it
bit.
has to be recorded. So
Yeah. Right, but we don't segregate it as a revenue. It goes back to general fund.
And that's relatively new in the last couple of cycles as finance has demonstrated that we need to be capturing and recording these things. It's a transparency issue and it's also a proper accounting of the revenue issue. So, okay. So we've got our total revenues at 50 million, almost 50.5 million. We take a look at the snapshot here of tax revenue, maintenance and operations, and our miscellaneous, minus our total operating expenses, capital projects, and a reserve contribution into a rainy day fund. We have about a 1% surplus, which is exactly where we have been aiming to be every year. Talked about this last year, that we had previously budgeted, we took out 1% in delinquent taxes. But Commissioner Gates pointed out, why are we doing that? We always collect money. But at the same time, you need a little bit of cushion there. And so we are hitting the mark exactly where we want to be at the bottom line. Okay, fund balances. This has been updated from last year now with the information and the policy that the board just adopted. And as it states, the Board of Commissioners has established a goal of maintaining the following minimum balance thresholds as defined by policy. So the general fund should have a minimum of 60 days of average expenses, or the equivalent of $7.7 million. Contingency cash fund should have 8% or 3.7 million. Capital fund 10% or 4.6 million. The insurance reserve fund 10% or 4.6 million. Our employee medical reserve fund for our self-insurance program, as defined by the state auditor in the state, and then our left one medical fund. So when we take all of these funds together and roll them up into one sort of snapshot, our projected fund balances going into next year will be just under $30 million.
And we don't have as much in the rainy day fund as we want.
That's correct. So this is the establishment of a new fund, and let's talk about that briefly, if we may. Because of the financial cliff next year, and I've modeled this out. It's a little bit outdated because I modeled it out early on into the budget process. But with the hiring of 8 additional firefighters next year, with the cost of living adjustments and the contractual commitments that we have offered to the union in labor negotiations, if we package all of that up, we increase it in 25, and we don't have a replacement to the M&L, we are in the hole immediately. We are in the negative. So without a proper rainy day fund, we are either making drastic budget cuts and reductions in force again, or a combination of thereof to make ends meet. That's not a situation we want to do again. So the establishment of this rainy day fund, while things look good this year, will set us up when we get into that area. Chief gave me a letter today from a consultant that we used on the benefit charge many years ago here when we failed. The bottom of that letter stated, we do not recommend running a measure next November because it's a hotly contested presidential year. So, he handed it to me, he laughed, he said, read the bottom paragraph. All of our planning right now is to run something next year. So there's all of these influences and it's not going to be a slam dunk. So making sure we have capital in the bank to help keep us afloat and help people stay employed while we figure out how we make things work is extremely important to us. Thanks for pointing out that the establishment and infusion of this fund is still short of what the goal should be.
What should that number be if a policy were fully?
4.6, I believe. Was it 4.6?
4.6.
And right now we can put 2.5. Let me also state that when we modeled out what the lid lift would do for us, with AVs actually better off than they are, we felt like that cushion would have been more significant. And when we modeled this out, we said we can hire new firefighters. We should be able to pay for 2 new fire engines. And we should be able to set a significant money aside for a rainy day. When AVs went down, that cushion went like this. So what did we do? We said, well, we can still hire 8, but we're gonna have that area in 25, which was gonna be of concern. We can buy engines, but we're not gonna pay cash right now. We're gonna lease them. We'll do a down payment out of capital and we'll lease them for now. If things look good for us with a benefit charge or a maintenance and operations levy after next year, funding should be okay, we'll pay them off. We don't want to get into a situation where we're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in lease interest. So there's a plan, but that plan changed when AVs started to go into the negative. Okay. Yep.
And we also adjusted non-response hiring. So we had some additional positions that were requested in the budget. We prioritized the 8 new positions over positions that were asked for in the budget process so that we could support response first, because that is the priority. We know we have a deficit. So that was the primary focus, was making sure we added those 8 positions.
That's correct.
If you scroll back up to the general, that's as of January 1st. So that 16 million, that's supposed to get us through April too. So that balance technically isn't a reserve. It's just getting us through until we collect in April.
Scary.
Yes.
That's correct. And I spoke about that. Thanks for pointing that out at the presentation, that the fire chief used to ask finance for what's your projected balance. And so that's essentially what it would have been. So we looked at those high numbers and said, oh, we're floating in cash, we're good. But those are committed. When the board adopts a budget, they're committing those funds. So you have to back that out. Okay.
The numbers sort of artificially high in a way because we just got our property tax revenue.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why you've got 15 million sitting there.
That's right.
What does it go down to? What's the lowest it goes down to?
Well, in
Budget year.
the spring of 2018, it was 1.9 million. Now our lowest has been 5
Yeah, I think it's 6.
or 6. So we've been monitoring this, and it's interesting for people that don't believe the numbers that we're presenting here. We get statements from King County every single day, every day. And when I mentioned that Kelsey and her team put all of the work into our cash flow analysis, all of those daily balances were plugged into a spreadsheet. And so we can look, yesterday it's higher or lower than it was the day before, this and that. So the data is the data, you know. Okay. Anything else on this? Source of funds, 81.5% comes from property tax, but when we actually add the M&O levy and the other agreements that we have with VRFA, King County EMS, those are all property tax driven revenue sources as well. So 97% of our revenue comes from property tax.
In a question in regards to that, VRFA just passed their Prop 1, and they're gonna build a station in the north end of their area. That's gonna probably affect our contract with them in 2 years, I would imagine, maybe 3.
Potentially, they've not been, they haven't had enough information to share yet, on what their total plan is, but yes, they've started design phase and they are in the process of looking at building a new station in that area. How that's gonna impact us, we're not completely sure yet.
Right, could dry up.
I've started having those conversations with Chief Olson.
Yeah, that station is on Auburn Way, so it's not a big chunk of it's up on the hill, but it will have impact without a doubt of how big that contract area.
Okay, use of funds, 80% of our budget is allocated to personnel. If you go back to years prior, I think this number was closer to 90%, 89.7 or give or take. But, when we actually budget for capital and contingency and reserves and all of those things, that number changes, but 80% is still a significant amount of money that goes towards your budget. And as you have seen previously, we've actually increased our staffing over the years too. So this is a better reflection of how the money is being distributed. All right, let's talk about divisional budgets. And it looks like we're already in almost an hour through, so I'm gonna try and speed it up a little bit. Okay, there's a projected increase for commissioner compensation going from 128 to 157, four.
First raise in 5 years.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very, very lucrative spot to be in, Commissioner Burrs down there. I'm sure you signed up for the money. So the first increase in 5 years is projected to increase our budget by just under $14,000. And there was also a change that we're not going to participate in WIFCA anymore, so there's a reduction in dues. So overall, just a very slight increase to the commissioner budget of 10%. The audits, we do pay for our audits every year, and based off of their projections, it's about an 8.5% increase to the audit costs annually. On that note, real quick, we've not gotten word from the auditor on when they intend on wrapping up the previous audit and starting the new one. So just a heads up, I think they're playing catch up like everybody else. Okay, this is an area where I will speak a little bit more to the line items. Next year is our 75th anniversary. And so to commemorate that, we've created a 075 budget code. And we have some money funded next year for district anniversary recognition events. And the chief and Lori and others are planning on putting on some events and connecting with the public and really advertising the fact that we've come a long way in 75 years. So we've got a little bit of money set aside next year, but that's one-time money. It'll go away after that. You have anything you want to add, Chief?
No, you're good.
Is that based on the earliest of the volunteer districts that existed prior to
Day one.
the very first one of those?
February 1949.
So a little bit of increase there. We have negotiations is still ongoing, so we were making sure that we're funding that adequately. Our strategic bridge plan is well funded. We use Waldron and some other consultants for those efforts. Chief Van Valkenburg has been working to hold a retreat, a joint labor management retreat. And so, and there's also some other divisions that have requested to have some team building, facilitation, and retreats on their own. So we've got some money budgeted next year to do that. Utilities, fuel, everything else is going up, as well as our casualty insurance liability. So the general budget has had a pretty big hit of 16.6% increase overall. The administration, and if you have followed us the last few years, we've been moving personnel within divisions as we sort of shake out and settle on how things are going to function. This increase of 564,000 is really a result of moving people into the administration and out of like business operations and some of the other divisions they were in. But this budget includes 9 administrative personnel for a total increase of 38.5%. But again, that's not exactly accurate because of the personnel moves. Business operations finance has a significant reduction as well. So finance used to be finance data and GIS, and Kelsey has requested that finance just be finance. And so, and they don't have to worry about sharing training money and overtime money and this and that. So we cleaned that up. And there's a significant reduction in moving people out of the finance division. But this does include the additional position mentioned in the highlights of a finance person. Overall, a 23.9% reduction in finance, which is exactly what we want finance to do, is save us money. Good job, Kelsey.
Thanks for taking one for the channel. Yeah.
Okay, the HR division. Last year, HR was heavily funded because we had a grant through the Department of Commerce for workforce development and DEI. That grant is no longer in place. It's been completed and we got the money. And so there has been some movement of funds within the finance or the human resources division. But the most significant change to their budget is hooking up with a company to help us with our L&I claim management. This is an area, leave management is very important to the HR division as well as us. And so Mary and her team has partnered with a company to help us square some things away on leave management and hopefully save us some money in the long run. So after we make some reductions on the workforce development program and we fund the leave management program, overall, it's a 10.4% reduction in HR. I will point out real quick that the compliance policy reduction is software that's actually the Lexipol software. It's being moved into a software line item and out of HR. Okay, operations. This is the big guy. We have, if you take a look at salaries, total salaries, increase of 11.1% or 2,113,000. So this includes hiring 8 firefighters and projected increases due to contract negotiations. Overall, the total operations budget is increased just short of $3 million at 13.3%. Battalion chiefs.
Joe, on overtime training, it's a significant, dollars are not used, but it's a significant reduction. Is that a reflection of what it's been tracking this year? So the 35,000 is closer to what annual expenditure really is? Or is there some real reduction in training on an overtime basis?
Yeah, so the overtime training budget was funded for officer development and DEI, workforce development training. Those are sort of one-time infusions to get everybody up to speed and trained. And so that was backed out. Thank you. Battalion chiefs, status quo minus anticipated cost of living adjustments. Okay, this EMS budget is actually a zero-line EMS budget at this point. Because Chief Deckenbaugh hasn't had a chance to work with the chief on what it is we're going to do here. So we expect that this budget will look far different next year. The only money that was in there previously were clinical reviews, which are is now going to be handled through the consortium, correct?
Yes.
So we no longer have to fund that, and so we have zero money allocated for EMS next year. Our special teams, rescue and marine, hazmat, are all driven by their request during the budget process for movement of monies or allocations for training or the likes. Overall, for the rescue team, a 5.9% increase, the marine team, a 20.8% increase. Hazmat, a 12.9% increase, and the swimmers at a 31% increase. And that's, the numbers aren't big. It's a big swing in the percentage, but Captain Michaels has a desire to, do some more training. And so, and actually breaking out the instructor training dollars versus the attendees. And so we've made some changes for him and his swimmers unit budget code.
Can we increase the number of
That's it's being negotiated in contract.
Okay.
Health and safety budget, so pretty much status quo. As I indicated previously, there's money sitting in capital for some of the gym equipment that had been requested. Okay, fire marshal's office. Some minor tweaks to some line items per Fire Marshal Nichols's request. Overall, a 5.2% increase. Good job. Keeping it low. Community affairs, significant reduction of 22.4%. We've taken out the second community affairs officer, and then there were some additional increases that our community affairs officer had requested, given the community outreach efforts next year with our funding measures. So a 22.4% reduction in the community affairs office. Okay, mobile integrated health. This was formerly CARES, and this last year was a very small budget, which accounted for a part-time social worker. Now that we have Chief Deffenbaugh and Chief Winter, this is fully funded to match just about the same amount of money that the county has allocated for MIH. And so this also, like the EMS budget, will probably look different next year, but this includes a couple of FTEs. Don't know what those are going to look like, but we anticipate the need to upstaff the division. And it also includes a line for MIH startup costs and special programs, and that gives Chief and her team some money to work with to start the program. So you can see a whopping 338.4% increase in that budget, but it's just funded as it should be. Training budget. Last year, this training budget had 4 training officers at the request of the consortium. That didn't come to fruition. And so the consortium, well, we get credit for training officers. And so the consortium costs have gone down in exchange for having the training officer. That didn't happen. So the consortium has increased our contribution and we've taken the FTE out. So we have a reduction in FTEs and training back to 3. And then we have the cost increases for the consortium. And so overall, there's a $33,000 increase to the budget, or 3.6%. Facilities, Sean has done a great job reworking the facilities budget since he's been here, working with Director Lee. Overall, 4.7% increase, very minor. Driven mostly by cost increases for goods and services. Fleet division, another well-oiled machine.
He's all he didn't even know he made a pun.
No, yeah.
Fleet oil.
I got it.
Vehicles.
You guys throw me off a little bit. So there have been a few tweaks. Supervisor Brummett has made some requested changes to line items. Overall, an 8.6% increase for the fleet division. Anything you want to add, Ken?
No, it's just, a lot of it's just due to the inflationary rates and the cost of doing this, so appreciate everybody's support for our division.
Logistics.
Overall, an 8.6% increase. Captain, anything you want to add?
I tried to save money by going with one ply toilet paper, but ended up at 8.6%.
Goes to the bathroom mouse.
That's a false economy.
Yeah. There was a very short period where I was overseeing, working with the support divisions, and I did not know that Captain had changed to one ply toilet paper, and then I was apparently targeted for being cheap, managing the money and buying cheap toilet paper. I had no idea he had done it, but it was the only thing that was available at the time. So.
And we use twice as much.
The IT budget. All right, here we go. Hope, Hope had requested another position and because of, the focus on fulfilling the objectives of the strategic bridge plan and our concern for the financial cliff, it's something we need to look at the following year if things look good financially. It's not to say that we don't need a person in that division, but we don't want to hire somebody and then have to lay them off. So we're gonna have to tighten our belts a little bit next year. But the significant increase to the IT budget comes in the form of our software contracts. And last year we were budgeted 203,000, and Hope and Dawn projected that needed to be 350,000. So cough, cough. And we took a look, and that is in fact closer to where it needs to be. As we all know, things are changing to software as a service. And we buy it, we no longer buy it and it's good for 5 years or whatever. You buy it, you pay every single year. And you get support, maintenance, and all of those things, but you're on the hook. So this has gotten out of control, but it's necessary. So, but on the auditor side of things, apparently moving forward, we're actually going to have to break out software as a service and disclose those to the auditor. They're going to want to see it in its own line item. So Hope had requested that we actually remove the software as a service line item. But it sounds like the auditor may require us to actually have that. So this might look a little bit different next year. But I just wanted to point out this $365,000 increase overall is two things. It's increasing the software as a service, which all of our divisions have software, fleet, logistics. So everybody is using software. So it's funneling into the line item that Hope and her team manage. The other part of this is the reductions that you saw in the finance division. Those individuals moved over here. So you have IT or data and GIS that are now being represented in this budget. So between those two, software and moving personnel into this budget, it's a significant dollar increase to the budget. But overall, 42.3% increase to IT.
What line item captures cost of storing data on the cloud?
Well, it might be the software contract right now.
We're not paying for like an Azure cloud storage or a big blob of storage. Really, what's happening is we're contracting services, and part of those services for each individual thing to store the data. So for example, there's UKG that we're using in finance and HR. That is its own service with its own storage, and all of that is bundled up together as the UKG software as a service bill. So they're doing the compute, the storage, and everything. We're not hosting virtual servers in Azure, is what you might be thinking of. This is more custom. The other thing I would add is some of the software as a service is obligatory. So we don't have a choice, and that's going to continue. Things that we host on-prem now, companies will not support in the coming years, and we will be forced to the cloud. And then the very last thing is a lot of the software was branched out into other divisions. And when I came on, it was really difficult to even understand what we had, and that made it difficult to support. So Dawn and I have tried to concentrate everything into one place so that we can have a better idea of what's actually happening.
We're kind of in a migration phase, if you would, where we used to store data locally. And as we connect with these software companies, data is being stored on their servers. So it's not just data storage alone, but like Office 365, we're paying Microsoft for those. And then for those licenses, but part of those licenses include storage for the individual who has the license. So there's a lot of layers to it. And then are we doing backups to the cloud yet? So that's another aspect. So we'll back up our system to tape or to drive, and then we back that up to the cloud and we pay for that too. So there's a lot of factors. So expect some changes as Hope, you've only been here a year or so now. Hope is still learning our system, and we've been growing exponentially during that period. So this might look a little bit different next year. Things might be broken out, but the costs are the cost. So, okay. And then our self-insurance program, overall, there's, from a budget perspective, it's a 10% increase. This is actually not our renewal costs, because our renewal costs have come in below 10%. But part of the increase here is that we have added people to the budget. So the positions that I've mentioned in the highlights, the 8 new firefighters, you're adding 10, 12 plus to the self-insurance program. And so our costs are not one-to-one. So overall, with the increase in FTEs and our normal renewal rates, it's a 10% increase to our medical program. And I won't go through the line items, but they have been updated to reflect all of the changes and all of the nomenclature that's used throughout the 2024 budget. So with that, I will stop talking.
Joe, I guess I lost which division it was in, but I wanted to ask about Valley Comp. It's got a 22% increase for Valley Comp.
Yes,
What division it is, but it's there. So
it's operations.
and why is
It's twofold. It's the increase in call volume. So we pay for call. So as we get busier, we pay a little more. And they changed their fee structure this year, so the cost per call went up. So for everybody's on the same page. We pay 2 different fees. So because the city of Federal Way was a partner agency in the beginning, we paid 1 fee for a per call fee in that area. And then in unincorporated King County in the city of Des Moines, we pay a different fee. So those fees went up and our call volume went up. So those 2 factors combined end up being a 22% increase.
thanks.
Any other questions?
Okay, agenda item 7 is public comments. If there are any public comments, they must be related to the reason for the special meeting, which is to discuss the draft 2024 budget. Are there any public comments? Okay, I don't hear any. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.